goal of the podcast is to talk about founder stories. So we like to start at the beginning and learn about your first entrepreneurial ventures and what you did and what you learned. So before we rewind, though, let's start on an introduction of you and who you are and what you do and what your company does.
Okay, well, my name is David Metzner. I'm 57 years old, and my primary business is B&G Sales, which is a wholesale closeout and liquidation company. So we will work with hundreds of different suppliers, manufacturers, importers, buying their excess inventory, their mistakes, end of the year inventories. It could be companies going bankrupt, losing licensing agreements. It can be any number of reasons why somebody would use our services to help them alleviate inventory issues or raise money that they might need if they're having financial troubles.
Interesting. So which verticals do you primarily operate in? Are you across the board, kind of whoever's interested in you, you're interested in them, or do you like to operate in a few different spaces?
So good question. So anything for us that can go back into the retail marketplace. It can be giftware, houseware. We were primarily a giftware liquidator when I first bought the company in '95. And as the business model changed, really during the recession, we sort of migrated into things that were more utilitarian, more housewares, more hardware. But it can be anything that can truly go back into a brick and mortar store, although that in the last 3 to 4 years has transitioned some into that e-commerce arena. And that is becoming a bigger part of our business, and that grows annually and has done pretty consistently for the last probably 3 or 4 years. And we've seen the most growth, obviously, since 2020 when the pandemic started.
Got it. So let's rewind now. Let's start with your first entrepreneurial venture. Maybe when you were a kid or college. When did you start?
Well, my first job was at a video store called Video King when I was 15 years old. And I know that because I couldn't drive. I had to ride my bike. Interesting, my only real memory of Video King, besides an early introduction to one of our largest deals we ever bought in the early years of B&G, was a competition they had for the top salesperson. I'm going to age myself, who sold the most VHS or Betamax players. And that just eliminated half of the population who has no idea what that would be. And what I found out when I was the top salesperson was it did not include part-time employees. And the award went to, which was a financial compensation, to the manager of the store. And that was really my first experience on how not to treat employees.
So you hustled your ass off. You were the top salesman and your manager got paid?
He was paid. There was a financial reward for every unit you sold, and I did not get that.
That's
wow.
Ridiculous.
It's so frustrating when incentives are misaligned like that, especially for a young kid just trying to make a name, like, oh, first job for summer job. And then you're proud of yourself. You work your ass off, and that's the thanks you get. Wow.
But I learned over the years that sometimes those bad experiences are more valuable than the positive ones. And that happened to me a number of times throughout my career. But over the summers at a young age, I went to work for my father. He was an importer who sold through schools for fundraising, created that industry, was the largest in that business. And I worked in his warehouse. I drove forklifts. I unloaded and loaded trucks. I pulled orders. And that was probably the most valuable experience because it taught me about the distribution business from the ground up. So I never started in an office. I started in back as a summer job. And even with the company I own today, when I first began, my first 6 months were spent in the warehouse. And there is nothing to this day more valuable than what I learned from how a business operates from the most rudimentary level, which was the bread and butter, which is shipping and receiving.
What kind of
And,
product? What kind of products was your dad importing?
This is going back a number of years. He's fortunately still alive and healthy at 94. But it was the old days when kids went around trying to raise money for schools. They present a catalog.
Right.
He was selling anything from the gift wrap, the non-essential, that not necessarily the candy and food part, which they still do sell, but all the non-essential gift part. And it was in his peak, he was the largest single importer of a single item in the country because of the volume that was sold through schools for fundraising.
Wow. That's
And that
impressive.
single item was wrapping, or
I won't, it's almost embarrassing, but his number one item ever was something called an onion head baking soda holder. And it is exactly what it sounds like. Today, you would put baking soda in your fridge to absorb odor. Back then, it was a plastic onion. You filled it with baking soda. And if I'm not mistaken, he sold 11 million of those in a single year.
11 million.
That's amazing.
Wow.
Yes,
That's a lot of units.
correct. So
Never
other than
heard of
I
that
think his
product.
other top item was a knockoff of the Rubik's Cube.
Very
Do you
cool.
still have some of those laying around your house?
Thank God, no. If you saw those, they would not sell in the retail marketplace today. But they served a purpose. So that was the early years working in his warehouse. I went to work for him right after college in 1987. And that was my introduction to the closeout and liquidation business. A gentleman, Bernie Isaacson, had started retail stores in Chicago called Bargains Galore. That was, I think, in the late 80s. Late 70s, early 80s. And that's where the B&G came from. And he was a large presence. He would come in, buy the excess inventory from my father. And in 1990, he offered me a job. And he has since passed, so I can be honest, I lied about what I was making back then. And he paid me substantially more than my father was paying me. And so I quit, went to go work for Bernie, and that was quite the education.
How was that? I'd be curious to hear more about the transition from working with your father to working with Bernie. How did your father feel about it? Was he excited for you to go out and kind of blaze your own trail, or disappointed that you were leaving the family business? Maybe a mix of the two. How did you navigate that?
Another great question. I don't think he expected me to stay in that business. He gave me business cards one day, and they said, David Metzner, President's son. And what I realized in that moment, that I was always going to live in his shadow in his business. And I had a great relationship with the staff. He had a fairly large company. And I think they respected me because they knew I didn't start in the office, that I had worked my way through the warehouse, filthy, dirty, covered in dust that comes off containers from China. And he sort of encouraged that change, career change, thinking I would get experience elsewhere. There's no one who can work for a family business that isn't somewhat jaded and spoiled to the ways of the working world, because you're still always the boss's son, and that somewhat protects you. I think my father went to the extreme of sort of ignoring me in the business, gave me a different boss, which was a great experience. But I was ready for a change. I felt I was sort of restricted in what I could do just because of the nature of what he did. And I think he felt it was a great experience, not really believing I would never come back to work with him. But it was a very, very, very different business model. He was fairly corporate, very structured. It was a far more complicated business, being in the import business, especially back then. And I went to a company there was no structure. It was antiquated. His business model was archaic. There were no computers. Everything was manual. He was kicked out of high school. Bernie was, at a young age. So he had street smarts, but he didn't have a great business sense. And I went from structure to no structure overnight. And went back into the warehouse environment, and he was a very, very difficult man. The person you saw, his persona on the outside, was not the same when you worked for him. And that experience was the most challenging in my entire life. And the only thing that kept me there was my compensation and an ongoing relationship B&G had with my father's business. Otherwise, I'm sure, as he did with most, he would have fired me early in my career.
How long did you guys work together?
I worked for him from May of 1990 until I bought the company in August of 1995.
So I'm curious, how did the relationship progress over the course of those 5 years? I'd love to learn what led to you purchasing the company.
Bernie was, again, a very hands-on individual. I will be honest, and this is not necessarily relevant, but he was a very large man, 450 pounds. So mobility was an issue. There were a lot of things he wasn't capable of doing. And the longer I was there, the more I was taking over responsibilities. I was getting involved with buying. I was able to go to trade shows and meet new vendors. I was now dealing with most of our key accounts in terms of selling. And I think his dependence on me was also his largest source of frustration, was losing control. And it was an interesting story. In 1994, probably late 1994, his son-in-law worked for the company, and his daughter decided she wanted to get a divorce. And that upheaval for him in his personal life forced a decision he should never have made, because he had no other interest outside of work, which was to get out of the business. And his only other interests were gambling in Las Vegas and dining out. I mean, that was really his only outside interest besides work. And he made a passionate decision about selling, which was made for the wrong reasons. It wasn't a professional decision. And he was very stubborn. Once he made the decision, he would not go back on it. And those were the most challenging months of my life, because he was hostile. He was vicious verbally. It was a very difficult time. I was bringing a bank in to finance the purchase. The whole business was manual. So it was a very difficult proposition to have accountants and a bank come in, try to figure out the finances of a business where everything was either handwritten on cards in his head. But I knew there was a business there, and I knew it could be successful. It was just hard to prove it to anybody other than a gut instinct I had that there was a much, much bigger business model than the small little business that he had built. And we were about a $3 million company when I joined him. We were about a $6 million company after I'd been with him for several years. And when we bought it, we were about a $12 million company. And I knew that there was a lot of growth potential.
How has the business morphed since you acquired it?
The first year was spent trying to embrace technology, which you can appreciate. To computerize a business at that level that was completely manual was probably one of the most challenging things, to get all of our financials, to get inventory, payables and receivables. It took about a year, maybe a year and a half, before we were fully automated, at least in 1996 years, when, again, technology isn't what it is today.
Sure.
We realized that the business was changing. Our volume was growing. Our SKU count, the number of items, went from 6,000 a year to 20,000 a year. Our customer base was now growing. We had to come up with a digital scanning system so that we were not guessing on where inventory was. And that was the most important transition, I think, to kind of fully automate the business so that orders could ship faster, more efficiently, more accurately. And our inventory was almost 100% accurate, which prior to that, we were maybe 50 to 60% accurate in how we could process orders and ship them to our customers. So that was really the most important transition period, probably in the early days, 1995, 96, and 97.
probably similar to what you were saying earlier, really sounds like from 94 to probably 96, 97, similar to the video store, where although that entire process sounds incredibly challenging, I'm sure you learned a lot throughout it that has served you well over the past 25 years since that happened.
Well, I have told everybody, I learned probably more about how not to run a business during that learning period from 90 to 94 than I did how to run a business. The rest was really trial and error, surrounding myself with some really good people who were with me, some of them to this day. That was probably the most important thing. I definitely did not treat people the way Bernie did. I was incredibly respectful. I was very generous, and we were not expected to make it in the industry. They thought we were just going to be it was going to be a short career with a 30-year-old buying a business in an established industry. And, we've been very lucky to have success. One major deal allowed us our financial independence in 1998. And from that point forward, we were pretty much one of the top 5 to 10 leaders in the whole liquidation industry. And I think that reputation still holds probably to this day.
You touched on incentive and motivation when you were at Video King. How did you right that ship when you took over B&G, and maybe it was already in place, but what type of incentive plan, how do you motivate your teams is what I'm asking.
Well, first, I think you have to, at the most rudimentary level, give them a place where they enjoy going for work. Everybody spends more time at their office than they do at their own home. Mm-hmm. So you have to give them a place that they're happy to be at, they're proud to be part of. You make them part of the growth. Interesting, in the early years, I had a salesman that I hired from my competition. And I will tell you honestly, what I did in the early days was I plucked key employees from my competitors, which was, again, very easy to do when you compensated them financially. But back then it was more making them feel they were part of something bigger. Mm-hmm. And a much more relevant part was they were part of a growth potential that they could be very influential in the early stages of that acquisition. But I invested in them. I reduced my salary by 75% when I first bought the company, because I hate debt to this day. And I invested in every one of them in terms of their salary. I paid them a lot more money than they were making with a company that had really no true revenue stream. We were growing, and companies that need money are companies that are growing and companies that are failing. And when I bought the company, for a period of time, I wasn't allowed to use the financial resources of the business till the deal was closed. And I was writing personal checks from my checking account to pay for deals, cover overhead. So it really, I truly believe that investing in quality help was the most important decision I made early on. Okay. And I've done that to this day.
Interesting. So going further off what Mike asked with incentivizing your team, how do you incentivize and motivate yourself? I think it's pretty cool to see that you've been with the same company for over 31 years and now have owned it for 26 of those ish.
Correct.
I'm curious you don't see nowadays that happen as much, where someone is with the same company for 30 plus years. What drives you to keep going and wanting to continue building this business?
I have never been motivated by the financial. It's always nice to be successful. It's really the only gauge of how well you're doing is there's no report card. No one's patting you on the back as an owner. So at the end of the day, the grade you get is the success of the business. I have always been incredibly loyal to the people that work for me. And that has probably motivated me more than anything else. You realize how impactful every decision you make is on the life of all those who work for you. I've enjoyed what I do. I will tell you that during the recession was a very humbling experience. It definitely tested me. It tested the business. I went through probably the biggest realization of how much people depend on what I do was I went through a divorce, which was a very, very challenging period in my life, probably the most personally challenging, and that translated into the most professionally challenging. That was 2014 to 16, where I lost focus on the business and sort of became overly engulfed in this divorce process. It's no one enjoys going through it. The business suffered. And it was then I realized how much my employees, our customers needed our company to be successful because they depend on it. So it was never the personal financial gain. We were always lucky that the company did well. I have always been incredibly, incredibly dedicated to the employees that I have today. And that is still the primary motivation in what I do. And we've invested in other companies, and we have an interest in an e-commerce retailer called Deal Genius, and we've gotten involved in real estate, any number of things. Our core business, though, has always been my primary focus and the people that work for me.
Besides the recession and your divorce, which were major hurdles for you, how did you adapt to COVID? And how did that impact the business?
That was, again, the most difficult because there was nothing we could do to change the unknown of what the future held. Again, the recession, you can cut back on staffing, you can change your business model, you can look at different product, you can, we were growing, we had multiple warehouses, you can cut back, but the pandemic was something that we, again, had no control over. The employees were all panicked. They were wondering if they'd have a job the next day. We had people who had just bought a house and had a mortgage. We had, on a much smaller scale, someone bought a new car and could they afford car payments? And so we were meeting pretty much every other day with my staff. When we saw what was happening and how it was impacting business on a personal level, we finally sat down and I told employees that for 30 days, there would be no changes. Nobody would be fired. There would be no change in compensation. I needed them to be as stable as I needed the business to be. And I think that was a huge, huge relief for most of them. March was a difficult month. Our wholesale dropped by 90%.
Oh my God.
What we were able to do is our e-commerce business was up 500% from where it had been that same month the previous year. And that was incredibly profitable, carried us through March. And by July of that year, we realized that there were a number of essential retailers that we worked with that needed us to supply them. We had a lot of suppliers, manufacturers, wholesalers, importers that were also panicked, wanted to raise capital to sustain their business model through however long this early stage of the pandemic would last. And so we have never been able to buy as much product as quickly, as aggressively at such discounted prices as we were in those early stages. So March, April, May, even into June, our warehouse is 275,000 feet. It was the first time our warehouse was full. We own this product. We were taking a huge risk. We were debt-free, I believe, at that point. So we weren't really borrowing money. That was a huge peace of mind for me. And by July of that year, as retailers started to open, our business was 6 days a week. We were, extra overtime, double shifts. And so by July of 2020, that risk that we took paid off tenfold. And we had one of our best years ever in 2020, and that continued into 2021. And we've still been very fortunate that's continuing into 2022. And we got involved with, PPE product, and we were selling bacterial wipes and hand sanitizer. We jumped on that bandwagon at the right time, and that helped our business as well. But we would never have thought in those early stages that the pandemic, which was so destructive to the retail marketplace, would really turn out to be such, a huge gain for us. And again, we were selling, our e-commerce business was growing, our e-commerce customers were growing. And so we did transition well very quickly.
Right.
And again, giving back to our employees, we got PPP money like most people.
Mhm.
And almost all of that we gave back to our employees in the fall of 2020 to thank them for their support. They were working during a pandemic. They were back in the office. So we reward our employees, tried to figure out a creative way of doing that with a dollar amount per year that they had worked for me. And we had warehouse employees that had been with me for 25 years that were making $15, $16 an hour employees that were getting a $6,000 and $7,000 COVID bonus.
Wow.
And it was, probably the most appreciative the employees have been. And that was on top of a Christmas bonus. But that was a really important thing for me to do. I did that more for me than for them. But I've been repaid many times over with the loyalty that they have shown since that, the pandemic first started. We didn't lose anybody since the pandemic started in March of 2020.
Well,
it's great
that's
that
amazing.
Yeah, and it's great that you had the infrastructure in place to be able to not only withstand but thrive in the little bit of a pivot that you had to make with the e-commerce, the growth of the e-commerce side of things, and then having the warehouse space to be able to keep up with demand and be successful and really look at, as you mentioned, what was such a difficult time for everyone, but be able to come through on the other side in an even better spot. It's always encouraging, I think, for Mike and I to hear when we see how devastating this pandemic has been, situations where there are some upside that actually came out of such a tough time.
Well, I'm not risk averse. I have always hated debt. And I've done whatever I could to keep us debt free. And I'm not saying that we didn't during the recession incur a level of debt with our bank. I think most people did. And I have always done my best to put us in a position where your finances don't dictate the direction of your business, that the retail marketplace, our staff, or my desire kind of drives that business model. We got into the import business. We got back into fundraising with a company called Links Trade Group. We, again, invested in an e-commerce retailer. So we have tried, we've been in a number of different businesses that have sort of helped support, sustain that our core business, the liquidation business. But, we've been lucky that, we've been able to, diversify somewhat over the years and change. And I think that's been a really important thing. Being debt-free changes how you run your business. And I think is probably the turning point of the business. I was able to really pay off early debt after 3 years after the acquisition, where the bank had forecasted 10. And that was, a huge factor in how we were able to grow the business in the early days.
Talking more about the early days, we were talking about some of the mistakes that the previous owner was making. Let's now put that magnifying glass on you and tell us about some mistakes you've made and learned from through your journey in building the business.
I would tell you to this day, the biggest mistake I made was taking our early success for granted, thinking that seeing annual growth was sustainable indefinitely. And that was, again, 2009 was a very, very humbling equalizer, I think, in all industries. And I would probably, if I could go back and relive those early years, not only does your business sort of suffer from that arrogance that you are always going to be successful, but your personal life does too, because you now start to live at a level that would be impacted by, a huge adjustment in income. And I was never, again, saying that I wasn't motivated by the financial. I'm not saying that your lifestyle doesn't reflect your success. And I would tell you that is the biggest regret, was not probably, utilizing that success in the early years to find ways to diversify early, look at other business models, reinvest. I wish I could go back and redo that. And that's probably one of my biggest regrets. And maybe a little bit of arrogance I had in the early days. And probably what I've learned is the most important thing is communication and honesty. And I was in the, I've learned, the liquidation business didn't always attract maybe the most sophisticated, educated group of people. The early days, it was kind of street smart, seat of the pant kind of business mentality. And I was called the Prince of Thieves by one of my largest suppliers. And they really appreciated how honest I was in the business. We signed contracts with vendors. We were very, very transparent. We would show them profitability. We went back and actually shared profits on deals. And that was probably my, one of the greatest assets that I brought to the business. Was if there was an issue, I would communicate. If my vendors communicated with me or customers, we could work through anything. What I don't like is when there isn't, again, an honest level of discussion over problems that we might be having, our customers might be having, or a vendor might have. And I've always said, if you're honest, we can work through any issues.
Yeah, you can't correct or address something you don't know about.
Correct.
Pretty simple. So I'm curious, with running a business, especially running the B&G for 25 plus years and being involved for 30 plus years, how do you keep your personal life separate from the business? I know it can get so intertwined that it does carry over and bleed over into your personal life, but how do you stay sane and try and compartmentalize so that you're not always bringing the business home with you?
That was hard in the early days. The business sort of defined me. I was working 6 days a week. I loved what I did. And it was the most important thing. And it came at the expense. I won't say that it came at the expense of my marriage. I think that was a completely different set of issues, but I missed a lot of my kids growing up. I loved what I did. And it took a while to find that work-life balance. I actually work less now than I did before. I found the priority of family and friends to be just as important as the devotion and dedication I had to my business. And I think understanding that, I am much more tolerant and patient, because those whose Bernie, his only life was work. And he expected that from every one of his employees. There was no work-life balance. It was work only. And any personal issues that you brought into the business were not viewed in a very positive way. I take a vested interest in my employees' personal life. And I understand that there's a work-life balance. And it's a really, really important part of what I do today. And vacation and taking time off, and the birth of a child, whether it's my own or my employees, it is a very, very important thing that all of my employees understand that there's a really connected personal part of the business as much as there is a professional.
What's your typical daily routine look like? From the minute your alarm rings in the morning to the minute you go to sleep.
I have not woken up to an alarm in probably 10 years, regardless of when I have to wake up. I'm a little embarrassed to say, because my schedule has definitely changed in the last 4 years. Part of this, Mike, but I typically get up about 6 o'clock in the morning. I would go to the gym and work out, usually with friends or a trainer. 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock, I get to the office. I answer all of my emails. A day has never ended when I haven't responded to a text message or an email by the end of the day. I can usually get about 20 emails in before I even leave my house. I'm in the office between 10 and 10:30. I don't take lunch because I find that I can get a lot more done through the lunchtime. I also find when I go into our lunchroom, everybody stops talking and it impacts their personal time. I also realize that when I sit down for lunch is when most people realize they can come ask questions. So I work through the day. I am on my computer all the time, whether it's dealing with real estate questions we have with properties we own, any number of our e-commerce business, our wholesale business. I leave the office about 6 o'clock at night, and that's pretty much my routine with whenever I'm in town. And I will admit that I do travel quite a bit, but I am always available regardless, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, through emails. Technology, cell phones have really made it easy to run the business, at least at my level, from anywhere in the country, anywhere in the world. So my routine, my days of getting up 6 days a week and being at the office by 8 o'clock, those have changed in recent years.
So
Very important. Surround yourself with really good people,
Yeah.
and they allow you to find that work-life balance.
Yep.
Right.
Yep. You have to find
Good-
people with
good
similar value sets and ensure that those are all aligned. And
Correct.
I think saying that, given your experience growing up working with your father, is B&G a family business? Have you brought kids or other family members in, or do you think
No,
you see that happening at some point?
Never. I would
Okay.
not. It's a tough business. My oldest daughter, who graduated the Ohio State, she now lives in Columbus as a teacher. My youngest daughter graduates Tulane in May, and her plan is to move to New York and work in public relations and fashion. And this is definitely a male-dominated industry. It is just that way. It is not by choice, and it's a tough business. It's very hard to get younger generations interested in the necessity to be at work because we're a distribution company. Our deals change. We have tons of deals that are labor intensive and repacking and relabeling. There are all sorts of unique things that happen in our industry that are not indicative to very many other businesses. But we are a distribution company, and our biggest challenge is finding young people who want to work and work in an office. And you look at young kids today and their resumes at 25 already have 4 or 5 different companies. So that is the biggest challenge. And I wouldn't want that for my own kids. This is not their passion. It was mine when I was their age, but they need to find their own path. And this was never something that they would have been interested in. So it is a family business, but it's not my family business. I have more brothers and cousins and brother-in-laws and in my business than I do my own.
What are your goals for the business? Is this something you're looking to grow, to sell? What acquire additional businesses? What's your next move?
Well, at one point I did look at the option of selling the company. The only factor that really played into that in my decision not to was the fact that at that time in my life, I was divorced. My kids were in college, and it was just questioning what my life would look like if I had sold the business. I have a number of friends who are business owners and professionals, some who have sold their business. And what resonated was that their phone would ring all the time. People needed them, decisions had to be made. And the day they sold, that demand for them and their knowledge ended. And almost all have gone back into their respective industries after. So what do I see for B&G? Early on in my career, my dad had said, decide on that work-life balance. How much do you need? How much do you want? And what price are you willing to pay for that? So I'm not unhappy where our business is today. If I see there's an area where we can grow, that's great. But I don't want it to grow where I can't enjoy a quality of life that I appreciate today. So I look at opportunities, but I would not look at a business where I had to be hands-on every day and run that business. I like to advise and consult.
Mhm.
People ask my opinion all the time, and I appreciate that more than I would running another company. Again, we've been successful for many years, and I don't need another level of success.
You mentioned your dad, and he definitely helped bring you up in the industry. Let's say, not the specific industry. Was he considered? Do you consider him one of your mentors, or do you have other mentors or folks that have inspired you over the years?
I would say only my father. I looked at
Okay.
his success. I thought that's what I wanted, and realized that there's far more to a career than just being successful. But he was, and I also learned, he was a traveling salesman. He was gone a tremendous amount growing up. That was one of his regrets. He shared that with me. I didn't see that as as a child, but I would tell you that absolutely, we are two peas in a pod. We are very similar. At 94, we discuss business probably 2 to 3 days a week, pretty consistently year after year. It's that common bond we have. He's been long retired, so there's not a lot of advice, but he does love hearing the stories. And yes, I would tell you that in my life, that was probably, my biggest mentor was my father.
And certainly not a mentor, but it sounds like maybe in a weird way, working with Bernie taught you the type of leader you wanted to be, because it was the antithesis of how he operated and led.
That is exactly correct.
Okay.
That described my relationship with Bernie and my experience working for Bernie to a T.
David, when I've been to your location, and I was enthralled with the variety of products that you sell. What are some of the recent cool, unique products that you have in stock?
Well, one that we're receiving right now, somebody came to us. It's a direct consumer furniture importer, and we're buying furniture out of 3 of their locations. Just a part of the deal is 60 trailers of KD, knockdown, ready to assemble furniture. We just did a deal with a supplier to Costco, an item that had to be relabeled and repacked, a Christmas item. Our inventory changes daily. Very unusual. The last 30 days, we have 97 trucks on the receiving schedule that we have to bring in, which is a tremendous amount of inventory. And it ranges from 10 trailers of decorative pillows, Afghans, a Christmas decor, 17 trailers of picture frames. A lawn and garden deal that turned into 3 back-to-back deals that will be about 20 trailers. We import from China. We had several containers of outdoor hammocks. I bought 17 trailers of candles from India. It is such a diverse mix of product. I am just touching on the tip of the iceberg, because the variety we carry is the key. When we wanted to grow early on, we realized we couldn't do that with the same customers we sold. There's only so much they can buy. So the way to grow the business was increasing our SKU count, the number of items we carry. And we took our average order from 2,500 in the early days to probably 4,500 in the early 2010, 11, 12, 13 to $6,500, $6,600, $6,700 as an average order today. So we laugh about the different variety of items we buy and that item count, but that was really key to our growth. So yes, we are constantly looking at product. It could be health and beauty aids to lawn and garden decor. It really changes. I'm not joking. It changes every single day. What comes in and what sells out. Aqualung, US diver, snorkeling equipment. It is, and I bring that up because that's coming in right now. It is a very challenging product mix to buy, and one of our reasons we've been so successful is we have buyers that we work with. The scope of product that I have just always had a good feel for what it's worth in terms of buying and selling has probably been the most invaluable asset that I personally possess.
How do you
It
know?
has been part of our growth.
Yeah. How do you know? How do you know what
You
to buy?
you just know. You just know. And I can count on one hand the number of mistakes we've made on deals. We make mistakes on items, but I've almost never lost money on a deal. Again, maybe a half dozen times in 25 years.
Has there ever been a time where you've just thought to yourself, I can't believe we're actually importing this item, or I can't believe we're actually selling it?
I used to probably think that on a daily basis.
Okay.
I don't anymore. Just again, I've done it for so long, and you are looking at millions of items that I have been offered as a wholesale liquidation company, millions and millions of items, that it's just second nature at this point. There's not much that surprises me. There's a lot we don't buy, but really nothing. I can look at an item and question why somebody would ever have manufactured that. I probably think that almost every day.
Anything specific that's memorable in terms of, I guess, quote unquote, craziest things that you've seen over the years?
Well, the largest deal that put us on the map were picture frames. We were offered a deal. An old childhood friend, I guess I can mention his name, Eric Shire. His family owned a company called Decorel in Mundelein here in Chicago. And I ran into him at East Bay Club, a health club downtown in Chicago. This is probably 1993 or 94. He mentioned what he did. I discussed that I worked for a gentleman. We were in the closeout business. They were in the picture frame business. Went over and we started buying some small deals, and that grew into larger deals. By 1997, his company sold to Newell Rubbermaid, and they started acquiring picture frame companies in 1997, 98. And we were put in touch with them. And over the course of the next 18 months, we bought 325 trailers of picture frames.
Wow.
Which made us the top 5 largest frame distributors in the country. And we were a liquidation company. And that deal, that one opportunity, paid off the debt, put us on the map, and we really never looked back. So that is the one deal to this day that I will never forget. I forget about most deals. That was really a unique opportunity, being in the right place at the right time.
Just a serendipitous reconnection at the gym.
Correct. And a deal like that would never be successful today. Just the category, what the retail landscape looks like.
Wow.
It's a fun business, and I can definitely see and know of your passion and how much you enjoy the business. Hence, it's sounding like you're not going to retire anytime soon or ever.
Not quite.
Which is great.
I can't say not ever. At some point, I'd like to, leave Chicago and, move someplace that doesn't have a winter. But that's at some point in the not too distant future. I'm just not sure.
No. Would highly encourage it. I just left Chicago after 11 years to move to San Diego, and wow, it is quite delightful.
That is my favorite city in the U.S. One of my closest friends lived there and just moved. In fact, he moved with his wife to Boise, Idaho. And we leave Monday and we head to Italy, and we're going to travel through Italy for 12 days. So that is my connection to San Diego, and I love that city. San Diego and maybe Denver are kind of two of my favorite cities that I would consider moving to.
Yep.
Yeah. David, any final nuggets of wisdom for our listeners before we shut it down?
The same thing I've told my nephew, who's 23 years old and in hospitality and trying to find his path. As much as the younger generation and kids today, I shouldn't say kids, but are looking for success. And right now in this economy, they're job hopping, they take a position, they get a salary. And as soon as they do, they're looking for the next best thing. If there was one thing I can tell anybody, is find your passion. Nothing is sustainable if it's just a job. I have seen too many people and friends to this day, peers, that never quite found that, the love they have for what they do. And they've had a job and they've had multiple jobs, but until you find something that you love, It's just, you're not going to have, you're never going to truly appreciate, what you do. And I think there's always going to be a little resentment when you look at others in your life that have found that. My friends who truly enjoy what they do, they are by far the happiest. They have, the best relationships. They're the most stable personal life. And you really do find that, really loving what you do, since it occupies so much of your personal time, is the most important advice I could give, even if it comes at the expense of maybe not the best salary, but it's going to make you happiest in the long run and healthiest.
Couldn't agree more. When you love what you do, you're not watching the clock all day.
Correct. And
you're enjoying yourself. And that's what's important. Good final advice for our listeners. Thank you. This was a great session. Appreciate your time today. And look forward to working out at the gym with you.
I'll
very
see
soon.
you soon. You've been a little lazy. I haven't seen you there in a while.
Well, Donovan and I both here in Chicago and in San Diego separately got COVID about the same time. So we've both been battling. I'm on day 9. Donovan, you're what, like day 11, 12?
Day 10, day 11. This is technically my last day of isolation. So excited to leave the hovel and re-enter the world.
Yeah.
Yes, I went through that in December. I'm actually at the kind of the tail end of fighting a cold, trying to get healthy for the weekend. So I think we've all found our health challenges.
Enjoy your trip, and hopefully you stay healthy during your time in Italy.
Sounds amazing. I appreciate it. Yeah. Thank you, guys.
Where are you going in Italy?
Flying to Rome, and then from Rome, we are going to actually drive through Italy to Florence and Venice and to Siena and Bologna, and then come back, spend more time in Rome. My good friend's son is in Sicily, and then he's going to come out, I think, and spend a few days with his father and continue. We were going to go into Croatia, which is what I really wanted. It's a little early. That's better in May, but with the conflict right now in Russia, I'd be a little concerned. So we decided to really just focus our time in Italy for this trip, and then maybe plan something at a later date in Croatia when things stabilize.
Amazing.
Cool.
I love Italy.
Yeah, I was going to say, Mike, that's your favorite, right?
I love it. Yeah. We are working on a 20th anniversary trip to eat. We're debating between Greece and Italy right now.
Well, if you pick Greece, Mike, I have plenty of free time. I'm happy to join you and your wife. I'm the third for a lot of friends who travel. So
you want to throuple with us?
Wouldn't be the first or last.
That's awesome. Cool.
Gentlemen, thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, David. Great chatting.
Thank you. Bye.
Okay. Bye.
Everybody got a dream, let me show you all love. From an idea, working it into a startup. This the show that you need, what more could you ask for? Never know who become the CEO next door. Tune in, every episode insightful. The type of vibe you will want to subscribe to. Let's go. Hey.